Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening one of the most famous documents of the 20th century, but we're going far beyond the familiar narrative you might already know. We're here to look at Anne Frank, not just as a symbol of suffering or a victim of the Holocaust, but first and foremost as this burgeoning, ambitious writer whose deeply private thoughts became one of the world's most enduring testaments to human dignity.
And that distinction is so crucial. When you approach her text, you have to remember that what you're holding is the work of a teenager. A teenager who consciously decided she wanted to be an author.
Right.
She was editing, she was shaping her manuscript, turning a personal journal into a piece of literature, all while living in, this constant suffocating fear.
So our mission today is a bit complex. We're going to dissect the source material we've gathered, and that's detailed historical accounts, some rigorous forensic studies, biographies, and of course the critical editions of The Diary of a Young Girl.
Or Het Achterhorst, as it was first known.
Exactly. And we have so much to unpack here. We're going to trace her life from her, comfortable childhood in Frankfurt all the way to the terror of the Secret Annex. We'll analyze the literary power she developed in isolation and dive really deep into the controversies, the betrayal, the defense of her work's authenticity.
Yeah.
This deep dive is really about a writer who set a goal to live on even after her death, and whose success, born from this unimaginable tragedy, still forces us to grapple with some of the deepest questions of history and memory.
So our story really begins in Frankfurt, Germany. Anne Frank, or Anneliese Marie Frank, was born on June 12, 1929.
And her family was firmly middle class, right? Well-educated.
Very much so. They were part of the assimilated Reformed Jewish community, and the sources are all very consistent on this. Otto and Edith Frank were devoted parents. They had this huge library.
I read about that.
Yeah, they really prioritized intellectual development, encouraged both their daughters, Anne and her older sister, Margot, in reading and, scholarly pursuit. It was a very liberal, stable upbringing.
They were really enjoying a prosperous life in Frankfurt, in an area they called the Poets' Quarter.
Right, the Dickster Viertel.
But that whole sense of permanence, of comfort, it was just shattered in 1933.
Utterly shattered. The political ground shifts just violently when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party gained control of the government.
And that's the trigger.
That is the immediate terrifying catalyst. Otto Frank, who was known for being pragmatic, for his foresight, he recognized the danger early. He knew they had to get out of Germany.
So he goes on ahead to Amsterdam.
He does, in 1933. He moves there to organize a new business, the Opekta Works, which sold Pectin.
Pectin, the stuff for making jam.
Exactly, a thickening agent. And he wasn't just, getting a new job. He was actively building an entire financial and logistical base for his family's future, completely outside of Germany.
And this detail, the establishment of Opekta, it's so critical because that physical space, the warehouse, the office, that becomes the secret annex.
It's the very foundation of it. The family's migration happened in stages, which was, pretty common for refugees at the time. Edith and Margot arrived in Amsterdam in late 33, and then Anne, who had been staying with her grandmother in Aachen for a bit.
She follows in February 1934.
Right. And they're trying to build a whole new life from scratch.
And Amsterdam was a pretty natural place to go. They settled in the Rivier and Bert neighborhood on the Meridiplein, and this area became a hub for German Jewish refugees.
A lot of people were fleeing that initial wave of Nazi persecution.
The girls seem to have settled in pretty quickly. Margot was a star pupil, and Anne joins the 6th Montessori school. The sources really paint her as this outgoing, popular kid.
And she picked up Dutch so quickly. That school, by the way, was renamed the Anne Frank School in her honor in 1957.
Meanwhile, Otto is working to make them financially stable. He starts a second company, right?
Yeah, Pecticon. In 1938, it's a wholesale business for herbs and spices. This was a really strategic move, trading in high-demand goods, and it's through Pecticon that they connect with Herman Van Pels.
The butcher, who had also fled Germany.
Yes, from Osnabrück.
Yeah.
Van Pels was hired as a spice advisor. And it's astonishing how the practical needs of Otto's business brought together the 8 people who would end up sharing that terrifying confinement.
But that sanctuary they found in the Netherlands, it was so short-lived. The trap just closes completely with the German invasion in May 1940.
Immediately. Restrictive, discriminatory laws were implemented almost overnight. The goal was simple: segregate and isolate the Jewish population. And the process was just relentless.
It was bureaucratic terror, really.
It was. We know from the records that it all culminates in Anne losing her German citizenship in 1941. Suddenly, she's officially stateless,
And the segregation ramps up. Jewish kids forced into Jewish-only schools.
which meant both Anne and Margot had to switch to the Jewish Lyceum, completing their isolation from their Dutch friends.
And this forced isolation just underlines how desperate things were getting. The sources show Otto was trying everything to get them out. He was trying to arrange emigration to the United States.
That was the only viable option left.
Right.
And this is where we hit one of the most heartbreaking what-ifs in the whole story.
The visa application.
Yeah, it was never processed. And the reason why is just, it's brutal.
Yeah.
The U.S. consulate in Rotterdam was destroyed in a German bombing raid on May 14, 1940. All the paperwork, including their application, was lost in the fire.
Wow.
A simple bureaucratic failure, compounded by an act of war, slams the door on their last hope. It seals their fate in Amsterdam.
An immense tragedy driven by a lost piece of paper. But even with all this happening, with the walls closing in, there is that one really poignant piece of documentation we have from this period.
The famous silent film footage.
Right. July 22, 1941. She's captured on film for maybe 20 seconds.
And she's just a normal teenage girl leaning out of her second-floor balcony window, watching her neighbor's wedding party. She's curious, observing this moment of joy in the street below.
It's the only known footage of her. It just freezes her in this moment of ordinary teenage curiosity, totally unaware of the abyss she was about to fall into. It's such a powerful image of life right before it became utterly abnormal. And that transition from an ordinary life to this extraordinary confinement really hinges on one single, very personal object, the diary.
Mm-hmm.
She gets it for her 13th birthday, June 12, 1942. It's not a formal journal, it's an autograph book.
With that distinctive red and white checkered cloth cover and a little lock, she decides to use it as a diary, and she creates this fictional confidant, Kitty, who she addresses her letters to.
And her first entries, they immediately show the reality that's closing in around them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even before they go into hiding, her entry on June 20, 1942, it details so many of the discriminatory laws. The yellow star, the curfews, not being able to use public transport, not being allowed in non-Jewish stores. She's documenting the very environment that's forcing them underground.
And the plan to hide was suddenly dramatically accelerated. They were supposed to go into the Secret Annex on July 16th.
But then Margot gets a call-up notice from the Central Office for Jewish Immigration on July 5th. She's ordered to report for relocation to a work camp, and the timetable just shrinks from days to hours.
So they moved 10 days early, on July 6th.
The logistics of that escape were so tense, so carefully planned. They left their apartment in disarray to make it look like they had fled suddenly. They even left a note hinting they were going to Switzerland.
A classic misdirection to buy them some time.
A classic ruse. And because Jews were forbidden from using any public transport, Otto, Edith, and Anne had to walk several kilometers to the hiding place. They were wearing multiple layers of clothes because they couldn't carry suitcases. Margot went ahead on a bike with Miep Gies.
And the location itself, the Secret Annex, Het Achterhuis, it was this 3-story space tucked away behind the main Opekta offices on the Prinsengracht Canal.
Right, it wasn't built for hiding, it was a storage area. But it worked, as you pointed out earlier, precisely because of Otto Frank's business. Opekta was a working, bustling office.
The perfect cover.
The daily bustle of a legitimate spice and pectin business provided the perfect sound cover, drowning out any minimal noise that 8 people would inevitably make upstairs. Plus, the business was essential, so the 4 core helpers had a reason to be there every single day.
Bringing supplies, news.
Everything. And the entrance, which everyone now knows, was later hidden by that movable bookcase.
So during those 2 years, the annex housed 8 people. And that close confinement, it inevitably led to tension.
Of course. The Frank family was joined by the Van Pels family, Herman, Auguste, and their 16-year-old son, Peter, on July 13th. Then in November, Fritz Pfeffer, a Dennison family friend, moves in, and he has to share Anne's already tiny room.
And her writing is just this brutally honest look at life under that kind of pressure.
It's a sociological study. She found Fritz Pfeffer insufferable. She really resented having to give up her desk to him, and she clashed constantly with Auguste Van Pels, calling her foolish.
And there were fights about food.
Huge fights. She saw both Herman Van Pels and Pfeffer as selfish, especially about food, which became a bigger and bigger issue as the war went on and rations got tighter.
But her honesty wasn't just reserved for the others. She turned it on herself and on her own family. And what's so compelling is how her writing tracks her own growth.
Especially with her mother.
That relationship was so fraught. Initially, she writes with what she calls contempt for her mother, Edith. She famously says, "She's not a mother to me."
Which is just a searing thing for a teenager to write. But under the weight of that confinement, she matures. Later, when she's revising the diary, what becomes version B, she adds this self-criticism. She expresses this profound shame for being so harsh to her mother, realizing she just added to Edith's suffering.
It shows that incredible journey from childlike resentment to a more adult empathy.
In a very short time.
She also got closer with Margot, and of course, there was the brief romance with Peter Van Pels.
That was such an essential emotional outlet for her. It was a product of their shared isolation. She got her first kiss from him, and they would spend hours just talking in his little room in the attic.
But even then, she was so self-critical about it.
She was. She questioned if her feelings for Peter were real love or just this desperate need for connection because they were trapped together. She wrote about her own sexuality, her changing body, with just astonishing detail for the time.
And that self-awareness was directly tied to this bigger ambition she had. I mean, they tried to maintain some normalcy. The girls continued their studies.
Right, using correspondence courses under the helpers' names. Margot took an elementary Latin course in Bep Voskil's name and got great marks.
But for Anne, it was more than just grades.
It was a higher calling. She wanted to be a journalist, a writer. And she poured everything, her deepest feelings, her beliefs, her dreams, into that diary. It stopped being just a record of events and became a platform for her own self-expression.
Her ambition just leaps off the page. In that entry from April 5, 1944, she writes, "I want to go on living even after my death."
It's an incredible statement. She was so determined not to be forgotten. She saw writing as her gift, a tool to express everything that was inside her.
And that self-identification as a writer, that's what leads directly to the version of the diary that we all read today. It's what transforms it from a private document, version A, into this consciously crafted piece of literature, version B.
And the catalyst for that was a radio broadcast. In March 1944, she hears Gerrit Bolkestein, a member of the Dutch government in exile, on the radio. And he's encouraging people to save their letters and diaries about the oppression for after the war.
That was the pivotal moment, wasn't it? That external validation that her private thoughts had public value?
Exactly. It spurred her to start this massive project of editing and rewriting her own diary for publication.
And that resulted in version B, which is a much more structured literary text.
She became a working author. She restructured entries, expanded on themes, revised her tone. She created the pseudonyms Van Dan for Van Pels, Dussel for Pfeffer, and formally addressed all her entries to Kitty. The fact that a teenager under that kind of stress undertook such a rigorous editorial process is just a testament to her dedication.
And none of it, the survival, the writing, would have been possible without the helpers.
Absolutely not. They were the essential bridge to the outside world. The core team was Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, Bies, and Bep Voskil, with support from Beep's husband, Jan, and Bep's father, Johannes.
And they were risking their own lives every single day.
They faced the death penalty for sheltering Jews. Their role was life-saving, providing food, news, managing the whole operation. Anne felt a particular closeness with Bep Voskil, who she saw as a peer, someone who brought her little comforts and news from the outside.
They kept 8 people alive and informed for 25 months. And then Anne Frank wrote her last diary entry on August 1st, 1944.
Just 3 days after that last entry, which was actually quite optimistic, she wrote about finding balance in her life. The Secret Annex was stormed.
This was the morning of August 4th, 1944, and the operation was carried out by the German uniformed police, the Grüne Polizei.
Led by an SS Oberscharführer named Karl Silberbauer. And it's an important distinction, as you say, that it was the uniformed police and not the Gestapo. Silberbauer was a mid-level officer. All 8 occupants were arrested immediately.
They were taken to RSHA headquarters for interrogation, then to a detention center in Amsterdam.
2 days later, they were on a transport to the Westerbork transit camp, and their fate was immediately made worse by how they were found. Because they were arrested in hiding, they were classified as criminals.
Which meant the punishment barracks, hard labor.
Exactly. Harsher conditions than even the standard prisoners who were waiting for deportation.
And the helpers suffered as well. Kugler and Kleiman were jailed.
Kleiman was released after a few weeks because of his poor health, but Kugler was held in various camps until the war ended. And this is where Miep Giese's courage just shines through.
She and Bep Voskil went back into the annex after the police left.
They did.
Yeah.
And they found Anne's papers scattered all over the floor. Silberbauer had emptied a briefcase looking for valuables and just dumped Anne's writings. Gies gathered everything up, the notebooks, the loose papers, intending to give them back to Anne when she returned.
She even tried to bribe Silberbauer to release them.
An incredible futile act of bravery.
Miep's preservation of the diary is what sets up the future, but the raid itself takes us to this profound and still unresolved mystery: who betrayed them?
This is probably the most sensitive and debated part of the whole story. And as we look at the sources, you have to be so critical because there's just an overload of information, multiple conflicting theories, and new ones are still emerging.
Right. So we have to acknowledge that despite decades of investigation, no single theory has ever provided definitive closure.
None. So let's walk through the four major theories and really look at the evidence, or lack thereof, for each one.
Okay, theory one, Nellie Voskle. This one gained traction around 2015. It suggests that Nellie, the younger sister of the helper Bet Voskle, was the informant.
Right. She was known to be a Nazi sympathizer, a collaborator, and she was apparently critical of her family for helping Jews. There are accounts of her shouting at Bep and her father, "Go to your Jews."
And the main piece of evidence is that Silberbauer, the arresting officer, reportedly said the informant had the voice of a young woman.
Precisely. Now, theory two, ration card fraud. This came from research published by the Anne Frank House itself in 2016, and it suggested a totally different focus.
That the raid wasn't even about the Jews in hiding.
Potentially. The idea is that the raid was part of an investigation into illegal work or ration card fraud connected to the Opekta business. The authorities might have just stumbled upon the annex by chance during a search.
So it removes the idea of a specific, targeted betrayal.
It does, though it doesn't rule out a general tip about illegal activity happening at that address. Then there's theory three, Ans van Dijk. This came up around 2018. She was a Dutch Jewish woman who, under duress, became a collaborator and betrayed at least 145 other Jews.
And the link here is an alleged testimony from a resistance fighter who claimed he overheard her discussing the Prinsengracht address.
Yes. And finally, the most recent and frankly sensational theory, theory four, Arnold Vandenberg. This came from a high-profile cold case investigation in 2022.
This was the one that made headlines everywhere.
It did. It proposed that Arnold Vandenberg, a Jewish notary and a member of the Jewish Council, gave up the Frank's address to save his own family. The book claimed this was known to Otto Frank, but he kept it secret. The whole theory hinged on an anonymous note that Otto supposedly received after the war.
And this is where the critical analysis becomes so important, because the source material is clear. This theory faced immediate, severe, and widespread backlash from historians.
The critique was overwhelming. First, the evidence was just condemned as far too thin. It relied on circumstantial connections and really weak assumptions. But more importantly, historians immediately challenged the whole premise that the Jewish Council even had a list of hiding places.
Right. There's no historical record of such a list that Vandenberg could have used.
None. And then the allegations got worse, suggesting source distortion, that the book had misinterpreted Otto Frank's own records to fit their narrative. The entire historical community just rejected the idea that Otto Frank would have concealed the identity of his family's betrayer.
And the publisher pulled the book.
The Dutch publisher apologized and recalled the Dutch edition. The whole episode is really a powerful lesson in how historical consensus and source verification are so necessary, especially with this kind of history.
So after almost 80 years, the mystery is still unresolved. But regardless of how they were found, the consequence was deportation.
They were deported on September 3rd, 1944, on the very last transport from Westerbork to Auschwitz. The journey took 3 days. It was brutal.
And upon arrival, the selection began.
Immediately, men separated from women and children. The sources document that out of 1,019 passengers, 549, including every single child under 15, were sent directly to the gas chambers.
Anne, having just turned 15, was one of the youngest spared from that initial selection, an arbitrary line that saved her life for a few more months.
And the tragedy is just layered. She never found out that the entire Annex group survived that first selection. She assumed her father, who was separated from them moments before, was killed immediately.
Life in Auschwitz was slave labor. Her head was shaved, her arm tattooed. She suffered terribly from scabies.
But witnesses later said that while she had moments of withdrawal, she also showed immense courage. And she was supported by her mother. Edith Frank, in this incredible act of selflessness, saved every scrap of food she got and passed her rations to her daughters through a hole in the infirmary wall. She eventually died of disease and starvation in January 1945.
Anne, Margot, and Auguste Van Tels were then transferred to Bergen-Belsen on October 28, 1944. Edith was left behind.
And Bergen-Belsen was already ravaged by disease. The conditions were deteriorating by the hour as the war was ending.
And it's in Bergen-Belsen that we get our last personal glimpses of her.
From her childhood friends, Hannelie Goslar and Nanette Blitz, they were briefly reunited. Blitz described Anne as bald, emaciated, and shivering. She said the shock of seeing her was just indescribable.
But even then, Anne told them she still hoped to write a book based on her diary.
She held on to that writer's ambition even at the very end, but she also told them she believed her parents were dead and that she didn't have anything left to live for.
Anne and Margot died in February or early March of 1945. They were victims of the typhus epidemic that swept through the camp, killing 17,000 prisoners just weeks before liberation.
Margot reportedly died after falling from her bunk in her weakened state. Anne died the day after. The official death date was long listed as March 31, but newer research from 2015 strongly suggests they died much earlier, probably in February.
The scale of the loss is just immense. Of the 8 people from the annex, only 1 survived. Otto Frank.
He survived Auschwitz, which was liberated by Soviet troops. He started the long journey back to Amsterdam, arriving in June 1945, where he was sheltered by Miep and Jan Gies. He learned about Edith's death on the journey home.
And it was weeks later that he finally confirmed Anne and Margot's deaths.
From the Bruls-Leiter sisters, who had been with them in Bergen-Belsen, a father, the sole survivor, left with the unbearable knowledge that his entire family was gone.
Otto Frank's return is what leads directly to the diary's resurrection, and it was all because of Miep Gies.
In July 1945, she gives him Anne's papers and notebooks, the original diary, all the loose sheets from version B. And the sources say Otto was just profoundly moved. He said he had no idea of the depths of her thoughts and feelings. He realized she had kept all of this to herself.
And moved by her explicit wish to be an author, he takes on the role of editor.
He does. He meticulously creates that first version for publication by combining Anne's original diary, version A, with her edited draft, version B. He restored his own family's true identities, but kept the pseudonyms for the others, like Van Daan and Dussel.
And this editing, it raises an important question that people have grappled with for years. I mean, he was curating a public figure. Did his decisions compromise the historical truth?
That is the central tension. We know the first published version was edited. Otto removed several sections, mainly to protect the privacy of the people who died and to, manage the narrative.
What kind of things did he remove?
Mostly Anne's really critical remarks about his strained marriage with Edith and her very harsh discussions about her lack of affection for her mother. The early version presented a much more harmonious family than her private writings really showed.
The initial impact in the Netherlands was huge, though.
It was, partly thanks to some influential endorsements. After Otto gave the manuscript to the historian Jan Romein, Romein wrote an article called Kinderstem, A Child's Voice. And in it, he argued that the diary embodies all the hideousness of fascism, more so than all the evidence at Nuremberg put together. That Achterhaus was published in Dutch in 1947. International success came, but it was uneven. The English edition, The Diary of a Young Girl, was critically acclaimed in the U.S. in 1952, but it was an initial failure in the UK.
Really?
Yeah. But its most noteworthy success early on was in Japan. It sold over 100,000 copies in the first edition. It just resonated deeply with a culture still reeling from the war.
But that drive for a complete, transparent record eventually overcame Otto's initial censorship.
It did. The missing 5 pages were finally found by Cornelis Sweeck in 1999, long after Otto's death. They were returned in 2001 and are now in all the new editions, detailing more of that family friction.
And crucially, other censored sections were added back in, relating to her sexuality.
Her exploration of her body, her thoughts on menstruation, her developing understanding of sex. And these inclusions really transformed the document. It wasn't just a historical record of persecution anymore. It was an intimate coming-of-age story.
And then there was that 2018 discovery, the 2 pages she had pasted over with brown paper.
Which, when they were deciphered, contained her attempt at sex education and a few dirty jokes. It just proved that even in that confinement, she had this normal, inquisitive, sometimes silly teenage mind.
From a literary standpoint, the praise has just been constant.
John Berryman, the American poet, called her style stunning in its honesty. Eleanor Roosevelt called it one of the wisest and most moving commentaries on war. And this was recognized at the highest levels. John F. Kennedy, in a speech in 1961, said that no voice is more compelling than Anne Frank's.
And the diary quickly transcended its historical context to become this global symbol of resilience. This is where it connects to other struggles.
Nelson Mandela read the diary while he was imprisoned on Robben Island. He said he derived much encouragement from it.
That's fascinating.
He saw a mirror of his own struggle against apartheid in her struggle against Nazism. He related to the confinement, the longing for freedom, the belief that human dignity could survive anything.
And Hillary Clinton used her story in the 90s to speak out against indifference, referencing the genocides in places like Sarajevo and Rwanda.
Her voice became this universal moral yardstick. But that symbolism created a tension, a point that other Holocaust survivors have highlighted.
Primo Levi.
Right. Primo Levi suggested that Anne's single identifiable face moves us more profoundly than the millions whose faces and stories are unknown. He recognized that we can't process suffering on the scale of 6 million, and Anne provides that necessary singular connection.
And even Miep Guy's cautioned against this. She hated the idea that Anne symbolizes the 6 million victims.
She insisted on it. She emphasized that Anne's fate was individual, her life was cut short, her hopes were destroyed, and that her story was simply repeated 6 million times over. It's a crucial warning against abstracting suffering into a comfortable symbol.
But that power, that recognition, made the diary an inevitable target for denialists.
Of course. Starting in the late 1950s, especially in neo-fascist circles, allegations of forgery started to pop up. And that required decades of rigorous scientific and legal defense.
The defense started almost immediately. In 1958, Simon Wiesenthal, the Nazi hunter, was challenged to prove she even existed. So he went looking for the arresting officer, Karl Silberbauer.
And he found him in 1963 working as a police inspector in Vienna.
And he confessed.
Immediately. He admitted his role, corroborated the entire story, including the detail of emptying the briefcase full of her papers onto the floor. It was the first eyewitness account from the perpetrator side.
And Otto Frank pursued legal action against deniers throughout the 50s and 70s.
Successfully, the courts repeatedly and legally confirmed the diary's authenticity. But the definitive scientific proof came after Otto's death in 1980.
When the diary was willed to the Dutch Institute for War Documentation?
Right. They commissioned a massive forensic study in 1986. This was the ultimate response to the claims that the diary was written with, say, a modern ballpoint pen.
So what did the forensics prove exactly? How did they do it?
They analyzed the physical evidence exhaustively. They proved 3 things. First, the paper. They authenticated the paper, the glue, the pulp, proving it all matched materials that were available in the Netherlands during the war.
Okay.
Second, the ink. They confirmed all the main entries were written with ink components consistent with that time period. And third, and most conclusively, the handwriting. They matched samples from the diary to known samples of Anne's handwriting from school papers and letters, and it showed the clear development of her script over those 2 years.
And all of this was published in the critical edition?
Yes, that edition includes Anne's version A, her version B, Otto's published version C, and the entire 1986 forensic report. It just cemented the diary's factual basis forever, scientifically shutting down the arguments of forgery. The power of her story meant that her physical location, that building on the Prinsengracht, it couldn't just be demolished. In 1957, a group that included Otto Frank established the Anne Frank Foundation to prevent its demolition.
And that led to the opening of the Anne Frank House Museum in 1960.
It did.
And it's a deliberate choice that the annex is left unfurnished, isn't it?
A very deliberate choice. It emphasizes the claustrophobic space. It lets visitors experience the dimensions of that confinement rather than focusing on domestic clutter. And it remains a huge global attraction. It was averaging about 1.2 million visitors a year before 2020.
And beyond the physical space, Otto Frank was very strategic about her legacy.
Very. He established the Anne Frank Fonds in 1963, a charitable foundation based in Basel, Switzerland, and he willed the diary's copyright to the Fonds when he died.
And what does that foundation focus on today? It's not just managing money, is it?
No, absolutely not. Its primary focus is active educational engagement, fighting racism, discrimination, supporting human rights projects globally. They'd administer the copyright, they loan her papers for exhibition, and they made sure her story is used responsibly in schools. They are the institutional force fighting revisionism today.
And the other physical spaces are still being memorialized. That Merida Plain apartment where they lived before the annex?
It was restored in the 2000s, and now it houses a writer-in-residence program for writers who can't work freely in their own countries.
That's a beautiful, direct link between her confinement and the contemporary need for free expression.
It really is. And her legacy is just central to Dutch culture. She's one of the 50 topics in the canon of the Netherlands, which is the list of things considered essential for teaching Dutch school kids.
Her name is recognized everywhere. There are over 270 schools worldwide named after her.
100 in Germany alone.
But I think maybe the most poignant piece of the legacy is the Anne Frank tree.
The horse chestnut tree she could see from the annex window. It was her one living view of the outside world, a symbol of freedom and hope. She writes about it in the diary, The Changing Seasons.
But that tree faced its own tragedy.
It did. By 2007, it was severely diseased and was scheduled to be cut down. There was this huge international outcry. A Dutch economist said, "This is not just any tree. The Anne Frank tree is bound up with the persecution of the Jews."
So they built a steel construction to try and save it.
A desperate attempt. But tragically, gale force winds blew it down in August 2010.
But its lineage continues, and that's such a powerful metaphor.
11 saplings, grown from the tree, were distributed to significant sites across the United States.
Where are they planted?
In places chosen for their symbolism. Liberty Park in Manhattan, which honors 9/11 victims. The Children's Museum of Indianapolis. The physical continuity of that one tree that Anne saw from her window has now spread across continents, reinforcing this idea that resilience and renewal are possible even after such a profound loss.
Her global recognition just keeps growing. Time magazine named her one of the most important people of the century. An asteroid was named after her.
Asteroid 5535, Anne Frank. The entire world, in so many different ways, has recognized that this one voice holds this profound, enduring significance. So when you synthesize the whole arc of her life, the refugee, the writer in isolation, the tragic victim, and then this posthumous literary giant, you're left with this powerful paradox. Her life was cut brutally short, but she achieved her most fervent ambition. I want to go on living even after my death.
And her success came from the sheer literary power of her writing, that brutal honesty, the self-critical maturation. She gives us a window into history that is so individual and yet somehow globally universal. But her story also reminds us of the, enduring complexities of historical investigation, the unresolved mystery of the betrayal, the decades-long forensic defense required to protect her work from denialists.
And I think the key takeaway, the lesson that her keepers and historians always try to impart, is that tension between the symbol and the individual. We talked about Miep Gies, who was so careful to remind us that Anne's fate, while it serves as this powerful symbol, was ultimately an individual one.
She was one girl with one name and one terrible fate.
Exactly.
So you have to consider what it means to truly understand the Holocaust through the eyes of one single, deeply personal voice. And Frank's diary is our access point to the unimaginable. It lets us connect with the human scale of the 6 million, which forces you to ask, if her individual struggle was repeated 6 million times over, then what responsibilities does that knowledge place upon us, the learners?
I think it means we have to use the single voice we've been given, the one voice that survived, to honor the millions of others whose voices we lost, whose individual stories are silent and unknown.
So her story shouldn't replace the suffering of the 6 million.
No. It should be the lens through which we actively acknowledge the profound, unique loss of every single other person.
That's a profound thought to end on, using the voice we have been given to honor the voices we lost. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.